In keeping with the philosophy of ES6, that is helping developers write very short and concise code, another great introduction to the ES6 language was arrow functions. If you don't know what that is, join me in this video as we explore this great new addition. My name is Kelvin and I am a software developer based in Nairobi, Kenya. And my goal is to help you go through technical documentations so that you may have an understanding of the tools that you are working with. If you are new here, consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel, and leaving a comment below. In case we mention any link in this video, you can find it in the description section. Let us jump right in. If you are using VS Code, I will recommend that you install Quokka.js extension. And what this extension allows me to do is to basically convert my editor into a JavaScript playground. As you can see, I am able to get the value at runtime directly in my editor. Before we take a look at the syntax of arrow functions, let us first look at a regular function. There are two types of regular function. The first one is a named function, in this case, function with a name called sum. The other one is what we refer to as an anonymous function. Basically, we can assign a function to a variable. So we can get rid of the name of the function and assign the function to a variable. And you can see that we are getting the same result. So by looking at an anonymous function, we can easily wrap our minds around arrow function. And the way we can convert an anonymous function to an arrow function is by getting rid of the function keyword, then adding an arrow after the parentheses. You will hear in some circles the arrow being called fat arrows. We can see that the function works the same way it was working before. We can do some checks to determine if really sum is a function. And we can see that the type of sum is a function. We can even go further to do another check. And we can basically see that sum is an instance of a function we are getting true. And maybe just to prove this, let us convert this to a string. And you can see, okay, let me comment out. And you can see that type of sum is string and instance of function is false. So that is how we define arrow functions. Just like a regular function, arrow function allows you to pass in multiple parameters. But we can even shorten the syntax further if we have an expression. So in case we have an expression like this, we can get rid of the return statement and the curly braces and just basically return the expression in the same line. And as you expect it, you can see that we are getting the same result. Another thing to note is if we are passing a single parameter into the function, let's say we have a function called greet, which accepts a parameter called name, then we can pass in the name parameter into the string literal. If you don't know what string literals are, you can consider watching my video on template literals. I will be linking it up in the card above. And instead of sum, we can console log the result of greet and pass in my name, Kelvin. We can shorten this further by getting rid of the parentheses. That is if we have a single parameter being passed in. And we end up with an even shorter code. But one thing to note is if we are not passing any parameter into the function, we always have to have the parentheses. In this case, because we are not passing any parameter, we need to have the parentheses. Let us take a look at arrow functions and object literals. If you don't know what object literals are, I will recommend that you watch my video on object literals. I will be linking it up in the card above. Let's say we have the same function called greet, which accepts a parameter of name and returns an object literal. And we have name as the property name, then name as the value. You can see that we have a function called greet and we are getting an object literal. What if you want to shorten this further? You can see that we are faced with a problem because after the fat arrow, we have the curly braces. So if we try to pass out the object literal directly, we get undefined. But in order to fix this issue, we can wrap the object literal with parentheses, and you can see that we also get the same result. One thing to note about arrow function is it does not have some of the things that a regular function would have. A good example would be an arrow function does not have an arguments object. If you don't know what an arguments object is, you can check my video on arguments object, function arguments object. I will be linking it up in the card above. So if we console log the arguments object, you can see that it is non-existent in the arrow function. And maybe just to prove this fact is, let us convert this back to a regular function. And you can see that the arguments object is an iterator, and in this case, it has one value of Kelvin. Another thing is an arrow function does not have the this keyword. So this, you can see that our regular function has the this keyword. In this case, it is referencing the Node.js global scope since I am running Walker.js. Another thing that the arrow function does not have is what we call the new.target, but we shall leave that out for the purposes of this video. So when we convert this function back to an arrow function, you can see that the this keyword is basically an empty object, and also the arguments object is pointing to nothing. One thing about arrow function is it does not have the prototype property. So basically, when it comes to prototypal inheritance or working with prototypes, you cannot use an arrow function. And we can basically check this by calling the function, then testing it out. Has on property prototype. And you can see that I am getting false. But when we convert this back to a regular function, you can see that it has a prototype of true. If you have found value in this video, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video. And just to mention, this is the first part of a two-part series of arrow function. The second part will be about when not to use arrow function, and I will leave a link to the next video. Thank you and see you in the next video.